They thought they had broken Rome's will by hoisting the severed head of its consul onto a spear. But they didn't realize that instead of fear, they had awakened a monster incapable of forgiveness. In this video, we will transport ourselves to the year 225 BC to witness how one of the most terrible mistakes in history led to slaughter on an industrial scale. You will discover the meaning of tumultus, a state where laws cease to function and the government transforms into a machine of death. Why did elite Gaesatae mercenaries march against ironclad legions absolutely naked? And how did this insane audacity turn into a nightmare? How did greed and looted gold become a trap that snapped shut around the neck of an entire people rather than a fortune? And why do historians claim that this brutal, cynical massacre, which claimed 40,000 lives in a single day, actually saved Western civilization from total extinction? Get ready. This isn't a story about heroism. This is a story about cold, calculated revenge, where an enemy's life is worth less than the metal around his neck. Watch until the end to find out the price Rome set for the single severed head of its leader. Freeze. Stop this frame. Zoom in. Do you see that object raised above the roaring crowd? It's not just a trophy. It isn't a faceless piece of flesh impaled on the tip of a barbarian spear. It is a diplomatic note written in blood. It is the head of Gaius Atilius Regulus, a sitting consul of the Roman Republic, a man whose word moved legions and whose signature sealed alliances. Now his glazed eyes stare at the frenzied Celts, and in that gaze lies not fear, but a verdict. A death sentence that the barbarians, without even knowing it, have just signed for their entire nation. Can you smell it? A mixture of rancid grease the Gauls use in their hair, cheap wine and fresh iron. This is the scent of euphoria. They scream, brandishing weapons, convinced they have decapitated Rome. What a monstrous, fatal error. They think they've killed a leader and sown panic. But look south. Beyond the horizon, where men sit on 7 hills who do not know how to panic. They only know how to calculate losses and issue invoices. And believe me, the bill for this head will be so high that paying it will take centuries. Welcome to the year 225 BC. The year the ancient world learned the meaning of total war. Let's transport ourselves to the Senate. Forget the white togas and noble profiles from school textbooks. It's stuffy here. It smells of sweat, fear, and old plaster. The news of Regulus's death reaches the Curia not as a mournful announcement, but as an electric shock. Are you expecting tears? Do you expect the fathers of the fatherland to tear their clothes? No. Rome doesn't work that way. Listen to that hum. It's not weeping. It is the sound of a giant, rusty, but flawlessly functioning mechanism starting up. A mechanism of annihilation. Polybius, our main witness in this case, describes Rome's reaction with frightening dryness. No poetry. Just numbers. The Senate declares tumultus, a state of emergency. This isn't just mobilization. It is a state where peacetime laws are suspended, and every man capable of holding a sword becomes the property of the god Mars. Do you understand what that means? The peasant abandons his plow. The merchant locks his shop. The patrician forgets his intrigues. The republic contracts into a single armored fist. The barbarians made a classic mistake. They struck at pride, thinking they were striking at will. But Roman pride isn't a fragile vase. It is concrete that hardens under pressure. For a Roman, a consul's severed head isn't a reason to flee. It is a breach of contract, a violation of the world order. And order must be restored, at any cost. And that cost is measured not in gold, but in liters of blood drained from the enemy. Historians love to talk about Gallic fear, that ancient terror lodged in the subcortex of every Roman since the time Geese saved the capital. Yes, they were afraid. They feared these giants who went into battle naked, feared their long swords and wild screams. But look at the documents of that time. There is no hysteria in them. There is cold, clerical hatred. The Romans began a census. They sent messengers to all allied cities. How many men do you have? How much grain? How many spears? They are making lists. Samnites, Etruscans, Umbrians. Rome's enemies of yesterday are all in the same ranks today. Why? Because Regulus's head on a pike showed them. Their head could be next. Rome managed to sell its revenge as a pan-Italian mission to save civilization. It was a brilliant PR move against the backdrop of impending slaughter. 700,000 infantrymen, 70,000 cavalrymen. Think about those numbers. 700,000. That isn't an army. That is a nation that has donned armor. It is a demographic press ready to flatten anyone standing in its way. Imagine forges working 24 hours a day. The ringing of hammers doesn't stop for a second. Sparks fly into the night sky like harbingers of the fire that will soon consume northern Italy. Thousands of gladii are being sharpened on whetstones. Thousands of pila, heavy javelins with soft tips, are being tied into bundles. Do you know why the tip is soft? So that after piercing a shield, it bends, preventing the enemy from pulling it out or throwing it back. This isn't a hero's weapon. It is a pragmatist's weapon, a disposable instrument of murder. Rome didn't intend to fight the Gauls. Rome intended to dispose of them. The consul's death became the pebble that triggers an avalanche. Up until that moment, negotiations, bribes, and diplomatic maneuvers were still possible. Now, no. The Rubicon was crossed mentally long before Caesar. In the eyes of the senators, the Gauls ceased to be human. They became a problem. And Rome solves problems radically. Have you seen a farmer weeding out thistles? Without malice, without emotion. He simply tears them out by the root so they don't grow back. That was exactly the fate being prepared for the proud warriors of the North. Meanwhile, in the North, intoxicated by first blood, the Celts continued their movement. They didn't see the clouds gathering in the south. They didn't hear the scratching of scribes' quills entering their lives into the column marked, "To be written off." For them, Regulus's head was a symbol of victory. For Rome, it was the signal to begin the hunt. A hunt where the game would be an entire people. The gold torques on the necks of Gallic chieftains glinted in the sun, reflecting the greedy gazes of as-yet invisible legionaries, and that glint of gold would soon become the only landmark in the oncoming chaos. Picture a tsunami, but not of water, of flesh, iron, horse sweat, and pure, unadulterated rage. Look at the map of Etruria in the year 225 BC. You don't see a military campaign in the modern sense. You see a raid blown up to the scale of a natural disaster. It is a barbarian flood. A tribal alliance, Boii, Insubres, and fierce Gaesatae mercenaries surged across the Apennines as if a dam that had held them back for decades had burst. 70,000 men, 50,000 infantry, and 20,000 cavalry and charioteers. Try to comprehend that mass. It is the population of a large ancient city that suddenly picked up and moved, took long swords in hand, and decided the world belonged to them. The earth trembles under the hooves of their horses, and this rhythmic hum can be heard for kilometers. long before the first clouds of dust appear on the horizon. There is no smell of discipline in their camp, as there is with the Romans. Here, it smells of roasted meat, manure, and the intoxicating aroma of easy profit. The Gauls are confident in their impunity, and you know what? They have reasons for it, or at least they think they do. In their collective memory, in their songs and legends, the image of their ancestors lives on. Ancestors who, 165 years ago, entered Rome, burned it to the ground, and forced the senators to pay a humiliating ransom. Woe to the vanquished! These words of Brennus are not history to them, but a call to action. They genuinely believe the script will repeat itself, that the Romans are still those same frightened farmers who will scatter at the first battle cry. This is a fatal error of perception. The Gauls are fighting a ghost of the past, not noticing that a monster of the future has grown up right in front of them. Look at this procession. It isn't a march, it's a carnival of plunder. They aren't just walking, they are vacuuming the territory. The richest lands of Etruria lie before them like an open book. Villas, temples, warehouses, everything is ravaged with the methodical nature of locusts. The wagon trains trailing the army are already bursting with goods. Gold vessels, expensive fabrics, grain, livestock. They are taking everything. For a barbarian, war is primarily an economic enterprise. You invest your life to receive dividends in the form of someone else's property. And this greed plays a cruel joke on them. The army gets heavy. It grows fat. Speed, the main ace up the barbarian's sleeve, drops. Look at these endless lines of carts creaking under the weight of loot. This is no longer a force ready for maneuver. It is a giant, clumsy serpent strangling itself with its own prey. Thousands of heads of cattle being driven along with the army turn the roads into mush. Prisoners walking in shackles slow the pace. The Gauls are transforming from predators into porters. But who would dare stop them? The first skirmishes with local militias end in laughter. Roman allies scatter like bowling pins. This only strengthens the chieftains' belief in their own invulnerability. Kings Anarestes and Conculatanus ride at the head of the column, shining with gold, probably already dividing the skin of the Roman wolf. It seems to them that the gods of war are on their side. They don't see the scouts on the hills. They don't know that every stolen amphora of wine, every stolen bull, is an extra hour of delay giving Rome time to snap the trap shut. Special attention should be paid to the Gaesatae. This is the elite of chaos. Mercenaries from beyond the Alps, whose name literally means armed with a throwing spear. They didn't come for land, they came for Rome's gold. To them, this war is simply a lucrative contract. They look at the rich valleys of Italy not as territory for conquest, but as a giant treasure chest someone forgot to lock. Their overconfidence is infectious. Looking at these giants, the other tribes believe, there are too many of us. We are too strong. We cannot be stopped. The irony of the situation is off the charts. While the Gauls celebrate a victory they haven't yet won, they are backing themselves into a corner. The success of the invasion's first phase blinds them. They move toward Rome, leaving scorched earth behind them. But the further they go, the deeper they sink into the Italian boot. They think they are dictating the terms of the game, but in reality, they are merely actors who have walked onto a stage, unaware that the director has already decided to burn down the theater with the troupe inside. The atmosphere in the Gallic ranks is electric. It is a wild mix of adrenaline and testosterone. Young warriors, having tasted blood and easy money for the first time, are in ecstasy. It seems to them that the world has broken, that the old rules no longer apply. You can take what you want. You can kill whom you want. This intoxication with power is scarier than any wine. It shuts off the instinct for self-preservation. They don't set a perimeter guard. Why? Who would attack such an armada? They sleep soundly, surrounded by mountains of trophies, under the starry sky of Italy, which will soon witness their end. The noise of feasts drowns out common sense. They don't hear the silence gathering around their route. The silence that comes before the trapdoor slams shut. The Romans saw it differently. To them, this slow, crawling convoy was not a show of force, but a target. A logistical nightmare the enemy had created for himself. Every extra kilogram of gold in a Gaul's cart worked for the Roman strategists better than a dozen legionaries. Greed is a poor ally on the battlefield. It makes you slow. It makes you predictable. By the end of spring, the barbarians decide they have taken enough. Rome can wait. Why risk all the loot to storm a fortified city when you can return home as heroes and rich men? The chieftains give the command to turn back. They plan to head north, along the coast of the Tyrrhenian Sea, to avoid meeting the main Roman forces, which they think are still somewhere far away. This decision seems to them the height of strategic wisdom. Strike, rob, and vanish into the fog, leaving Rome humiliated and looted. The perfect crime. But the geography of Italy has its own plans. The Gauls don't know that the road they chose for retreat leads not to freedom. It leads into a narrow corridor between the sea and the hills, a corridor that will become a death row cell. Their carts, laden with gold and utensils, creak as they move toward the coast. Dust rises in a column, marking their path for anyone with eyes to see. They think they are carrying away the riches of Etruria. In reality, they are carrying their own death, packed in beautiful chests. Because there, where they are heading, near Cape Telamon, the landscape is already preparing a surprise for them, compared to which the wrath of the legions will seem like mercy. The gold torques on their necks, symbols of status just yesterday, will soon become beacons for the greedy eyes of the Roman infantry. And heavy wagons will turn into barricades against which their hope for salvation will shatter. The gravity of gold is the merciless physics of war. The Roman infantry turned trophy collection into a bloody harvest. But for the Gallic chieftains, these overflowing carts were not a burden, but a ticket to eternity. They moved north along the Tyrrhenian coast, confident they had outplayed fate itself. In their eyes, the map of Italy looked simple. Behind them lay a looted and humiliated Rome. Ahead, an open road home to the cool forests of Cisalpine Gaul. But the map is not the territory. And what looks like a straight line of escape on parchment turns out in reality to be the narrow neck of a bottle into which the army is driving itself. Let's look at the situation from a bird's eye view. Picture this anthill of 50,000 infantry and 20,000 cavalry stretching for kilometers. To the left is the endless sea, which seems empty. To the right are wooded hills obscuring the horizon. And straight ahead lies Cape Telamon. In the year 225 BC, there were no resorts here. There was only a narrow strip of land sandwiched between water and rocks. The perfect place for an ambush. But the Gauls weren't expecting an ambush. Who was there to fear? The only Roman army they knew about was trailing somewhere far in the rear, licking its wounds and hesitating to engage in open battle. This is the classic barbarian mistake, confusing the absence of an enemy in one's field of vision with his absence in reality. The Roman Republic was not asleep at this moment. It was operating as a giant logistical network, transmitting data faster than the swiftest Gallic horses could gallop. While the Celts sang songs of victory, heavy shadows were already gliding through the sea. Have you ever heard the term fog of war? Usually, this refers to the chaos of battle, smoke, and confusion. But the real fog of war is an information vacuum. The Gauls were marching inside a bubble of ignorance. They didn't know that the Mediterranean was a Roman lake. They didn't see hundreds of quinqueremes approaching the shore from the south, their bronze-clad prows cutting through the waves. This wasn't just a second army. This was the X factor that turns a chess match into a beating. The second consular army was moving from the south, quietly, fast, relentlessly. While the Gauls were looting Etruria, the Romans performed a miracle of troop transport. Sardinia, Corsica, garrisons were pulled from their posts and loaded onto ships. It was a race against time, and Rome was winning it with frightening efficiency. But the barbarians on the shore saw only seagulls and a calm surf. It seemed to them that the wind gods favored their return. In reality, the geography of Italy betrayed the invaders at that moment. The Apennine Peninsula is structured such that it is difficult for two huge armies to miss each other, especially if one controls the sea. The road along the coast, chosen by chieftains Anerestes and Concoletanus, seemed logical. It allowed them to avoid difficult crossings over mountain passes. But this ease was the bait. With every step north, with every creak of a wheel on a cart laden with Etruscan silver, they walked deeper into the throat of the trap. Imagine the mood in the Gallic camp. The heat of early summer. Dust hanging in the air like a thick curtain. Laughter, coarse jokes. Warriors discuss how they will spend their share of the loot. One dreams of buying a herd of cows, another a new wife, another ordering a sword with a gold hilt from the smith. They are already mentally home. They are relaxed. Reconnaissance is sloppy. Why strain yourself if the enemy is beaten? This collective hallucination of safety was arguably Rome's most terrifying weapon. The Republic let the enemy believe in his invulnerability, just enough for him to stick his neck out for the blow. Meanwhile, in the south, the trap began to close. Legions landed on the shore, forming battle lines with mechanical precision. No shouting, no wasted movement. Only the clank of armor and short commands from centurions. The Romans knew where the enemy was. The Gauls knew nothing. It was a game played blind, where one player is blindfolded and the other holds a hammer. Cape Telamon was getting closer. For the Gauls, it was just a landmark, another point on the route. But for history, it became a wall. An invisible wall against which the most powerful barbarian army of the century was destined to shatter. If the chieftains had a drone, if they could have risen into the air just 100 meters, they would have seen a terrifying picture. From the north, the remnants of previously defeated Roman units were advancing on them, thirsty for revenge. From the south, cutting off the retreat, marched a fresh, rested armada at full strength. But there were no drones. There was only a dusty road, greed, and criminal negligence. By the end of the day, the Gallic advance guard noticed something strange. Ahead, where there should have been an open road, glints of sun on metal flashed on the hills. At first, they thought it was a mirage, or perhaps a small detachment of local militia deciding to play hero. Gallic horsemen, laughing, galloped forward to disperse this nuisance. They hadn't yet realized this wasn't a nuisance. It was the anvil upon which fate would soon place them. And from behind, still invisible beyond the horizon, the hammer was already being raised. The irony of the situation reached its peak. The army that came to plunder had itself turned into the richest caravan in history, trapped in a narrow corridor. Gold cups and statues of gods in their wagons jingled with every bump, as if counting down the final hours of their freedom. This jingling drowned out the quiet but growing hum from the south, the sound of tens of thousands of Caligae marching in unison. Telamon ceased to be a geographical name. It became a sentence. The barbarians thought they were leaving with loot, but in reality, they were walking straight into the jaws of a beast that was hungry and angry. And when the first Roman maniples of Lucius Aemilius Pappus appeared on the crests of the hills, blocking the way north, it finally dawned on the Gauls. There is no road home anymore. There is only a narrow strip of land, the sea, and a forest of pila aimed at their unprotected chests. The situation ceased to be a military operation. It turned into a geometric problem of survival, for which the Romans had a solution prepared in advance. At that moment, as the sun began to dip toward sunset, illuminating the rows of legionaries with blood-red light, the barbarian flood hit a Roman dam. The water began to rise, and it had nowhere to go. The realization of the trap didn't come immediately like a lightning strike, but slowly, like icy cold seeping into a ship's hold. First, bewilderment, then anxiety, and finally, soul-chilling terror from the realization that they were squeezed between two millstones. From the north, veterans whose honor had been violated. From the south, fresh forces hungry for glory. And in the middle, them, burdened with gold, exhausted, and absolutely unprepared for the hunter and prey to switch places. Have you ever felt the walls closing in? Not in a small room, but in an open field, under an endless blue sky. This paradoxical, maddening sense of claustrophobia in an open space is exactly what tens of thousands of men experienced that afternoon. The air seemed to become as dense as water. Breathing became harder by the minute, though lungs were working at their limit. The sandwich of death we spoke of was not a metaphor. It was a harsh, geometric reality created by Roman logistical genius. Look at the horizon through the eyes of a Gallic sentry. To the north, a forest of spears. These are the legions burning with the desire to avenge their dead consul Regulus. They aren't just enemies. They are executioners come to collect a debt. Now turn south, to where you just came from, hoping for salvation. There is no road there anymore. Dust is rising there, and through that dust, the outlines of eagles and vexilla of the Second Consular Army emerge. Lucius Aemilius Pappus is here. He didn't arrive late. He arrived with the precision of a chronometer to slam the coffin lid shut. It was the moment of truth. A moment when biology takes over bravado. The adrenaline levels in the barbarian's blood spiked to lethal marks. Imagine an animal backed into a corner. It thrashes, bares its teeth, growls, but deep in its eyes, the understanding of the end has already settled. The Gauls found themselves in a stone sack. On one side, the Tyrrhenian Sea, cold and indifferent. On the other, the steep hills of Etruria, impassable for a huge wagon train of loot. And in front and behind, walls of Roman shields slowly but relentlessly closing in to crush everything between them. Roman strategy in action isn't a knightly duel. It is an industrial press. Pappus's legions deployed into battle formations with frightening calm. No rushing. Centurions barked orders. Soldiers took their places in maniples, checked helmet straps, tested the weight of pila in their hands. For them, this was work. Hard, bloody, but understandable work. They saw before them not fearsome warriors of legend, but simply a crowd that needed to be organized into dead bodies. For the Gallic chieftains, Aneroestes and Concolitanus, this was the collapse of their entire worldview. Their bet on speed and audacity was beaten by the card of Roman discipline. They thought they were playing checkers, jumping over squares and taking pieces, but it turned out the Romans had been playing Go all along, surrounding territory and depriving the opponent of air. The realization that there was nowhere to run hit the army's morale harder than a battering ram against gates. Panic set in. But not the panic where men drop weapons and run. There was nowhere to run. It was a panic of action. Chaotic attempts to reorganize. The giant, clumsy serpent of the Gallic column began to writhe, trying to grow a second head. They had to do the impossible: fight on two fronts simultaneously. The traditional formation, oriented for a forward strike, didn't work here. The rear ceased to be the rear. Every warrior's back suddenly turned into a target. Do you hear that noise? It isn't the clang of swords. It is the shouting of tens of thousands of voices trying to out-scream each other in different dialects. The chieftain's orders drowned in the roar of trumpets and the neighing of horses. The wagon train with looted goods, which just that morning had been a source of pride, now became a curse. Carts hindered maneuver, blocked passages, created jams. The gold dragged them to the bottom, but no one wanted to abandon the loot. Greed fought the instinct for self-preservation, and in this struggle, death was winning. The Gauls made the only possible decision in this situation, a desperate and technically difficult decision. They began to form up back to back. The insubres and boii, those at the tail of the column, turned to face Pappus's advancing legions. Those in the vanguard remained facing Regulus's veterans. The army turned into a living rectangle, bristling with spears and swords in all directions. It was a fortress of flesh and bone, erected in the middle of a field. But look at their faces. There is no confidence of victors in them. There is the grim determination of the doomed. They understand that help is nowhere to be found, that their gods stayed behind the Alps, that tonight many of them will feast in the halls of the dead if they are lucky enough to die quickly. And the Romans watched this reorganization with the professional interest of engineers observing the vibrations of a structure before demolition. Pappus's legionaries approached, step by step. The synchronous strike of thousands of souls on dry earth created a rhythm like the beating of a giant heart. It was the rhythm of inevitability. The Roman war machine knew no pity. It knew only efficiency. Corner, immobilize, destroy. Exactly in that order. They were in no hurry to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Why? Time was working for them. The sun baked the barbarians' heads, water was running out, and nerves were strung tight as ballista strings. In the center of this chaos, on a narrow strip of land squeezed between two Roman armies, a terrible transformation was taking place. Warriors accustomed to being hunters realized they were the game. And this role reversal awakened something primal in them. If we are destined to die, they decided, we will take as many Romans with us as we can. We will make the price of our death exorbitant for the Republic. The air trembled with tension. It seemed a single spark would be enough to make this entire space explode. And the Gaesatae became that spark. Those very mercenaries who lived by war and for war. They stood in the front ranks, watching the approaching Roman shields. They felt cramped in this formation. They felt stifled in this trap. And then they decided to change the rules of the game. If tactics don't work, if strategy has failed, only pure, insane, animal fury remains. They began to step forward, beyond the battle line. The expression of anxiety vanished from their faces, giving way to a mask of absolute, inhuman ecstasy. They were challenging not only the Romans, they were challenging death itself. And what they did in the next second made even seasoned legion veterans freeze in astonishment. The Gaesatae began tearing off their clothes. Cloaks, tunics, trousers, everything flew onto the dusty ground. They remained standing absolutely naked, save for the gold torques around their necks and heavy shields in their hands. It was an act of incredible bravado and contempt for the enemy. They offered their bodies as targets, saying, "Look, we do not fear your iron. We are the element itself." Their pale skin contrasted sharply with the tanned bodies of the Italians, creating a surreal picture. White spots in a sea of mud and metal. This gesture was the barbarians' last trump card. A psychological attack designed to break the Romans' will through shock and awe. The Gaesatae raised their swords to the sky and let out a scream that seemed to crack the heavens themselves. The sound wave hit the Roman ranks, causing horses to rear. A concert of death began, the overture to which was this wild, primal roar of naked giants ready to die, but not surrender. Do you hear that sound? Close your eyes and try to imagine. It isn't a human scream. It is a howl from the underworld bursting onto the Tuscan soil. If you think you know what war sounds like, you are mistaken. Ancient battle is primarily acoustic violence, and on that day at Telamon, the Gauls decided that if they couldn't defeat the Romans with strategy, they would shatter their minds with sound. Thousands of trumpeters simultaneously raised their cornices, long bronze horns with bells shaped like the heads of predatory beasts, to their lips. Vertically up, into the sky, exhale. And the air was torn by a wild, vibrating roar, resembling the death rattle of a giant animal. This sound isn't just heard with the ears. It hits the diaphragm. It makes your insides vibrate. And the most terrifying part, the acoustics. The hills around Telamon acted like walls in a concert hall, reflecting and amplifying this cacophonous nightmare. It seemed as if not just people were screaming, but the earth itself, the trees and the stones. But the main horror awaited the Romans not in their ears, but in their eyes. Look at the first row of the Gallic formation, where the Gaesatae stand. Do you expect to see armor, chainmail, leather? No. You see human skin. Absolutely naked, pale flesh, covered in sweat and war paint. It was an act of transcendent, suicidal audacity. The mercenaries threw off their cloaks and trousers, tossing them in a pile behind the line. They remained in their birthday suits. The only things they wore were weapons and gold. Heavy gold torques, neck rings, shine in the sun like badges of the doomed. Gold bracelets on muscular arms. And that's all. No protection. No right to make a mistake. Why did they do it? Roman historians wrote about practicality, that brushwood caught on clothes. Nonsense. It was religious ecstasy and psychological terror. By stripping, the warrior said to the enemy and the gods, "I don't need armor. My protection is my rage. I am invulnerable." Imagine you are standing in the front line of a Roman maniple. You are a hastatus, a young recruit. You have a helmet, greaves, a heavy scutum shield, a chest plate. You are packed in iron and bronze like a tin can. And opposite you stands a 2-meter giant who despises your protection so much that he came out to fight naked. What do you feel? Laughter? No. You feel a chill crawling down your spine. Because a normal person doesn't act like that. And if he isn't normal, it means he is possessed. It means he cannot be killed by a simple sword strike. This sight of naked flesh terrified the legionaries more than the heaviest cavalry. It was a clash of the rational Roman world with something ancient, chthonic, defying logic. While the Gaesatae put on their show of death in the vanguard, the rest of the Gallic army was feverishly reorganizing. It was a miracle of coordination amidst chaos. The insubres and boii, caught in the pincers, stood back to back, a living rectangle, a two-faced Janus of war. One wall of shields faced north, meeting Pappus's legions. The other faced south, grinning at the veterans. The wagons with loot were shoved to the flanks, creating improvised barricades. Even in the moment of mortal danger, they couldn't part with the gold. It became the walls of their fortress.
Imagine the tension in the center of this formation.
There, deep behind the warriors' backs, a crush prevailed. People, horses, wagons, everything mixed together. The smell of fear overpowered the smell of sweat. The warriors knew. There was nowhere to retreat. Behind their backs was not a friendly rear, but the backs of comrades who were also facing death. This creates a specific psychology, the psychology of a cornered rat. When hope disappears, absolute pure cruelty takes its place, and the Gaesatae continued their dance. They stepped forward beyond the battle line, brandishing spears and shields. They challenged Romans to duels, shouted insults, beat their chests. Their oil-glistened bodies shone like statues come to life in a nightmare. Every vein, every muscle was visible. It was an exhibition of physical power designed to show the Romans their insignificance. "Look at us! We are descendants of Titans. And who are you?"
Little men in iron boxes.
Roman commanders, sitting on horses behind the line, watched this with icy calm. To them, this wasn't magic. It was a target. A naked body is just soft tissue into which it is easiest to drive the point of a pilum. They didn't see heroes. They saw vulnerability. But the simple soldiers in the ranks trembled. Their shields shook in their hands. The noise of trumpets, the screams of barbarians, the trembling of the earth from thousands of feet, all this pressed on the psyche, trying to break the formation before the first blow. Could you have stood there? In the front row? When a wave of sound and fury rushes at you, when in front of you are men who clearly do not value their lives, which means they will gladly take yours. It was the moment of truth, a test of the strength not of armor, but of the nervous system. The Gauls bet on shock and awe. They hoped the Romans, seeing this insane carnival of death, would flinch.
That discipline would crack in the face of primal force.
That a civilized man would not withstand the gaze of a savage. The Gaesatae growled, bit their shields, their eyes filled with blood. They turned themselves into berserkers, driving their bodies into a trance state where pain does not exist. But they forgot one detail. A Roman legion isn't a gathering of people. It is a machine. And a machine has no nerves. A machine has only an algorithm. And while the barbarians screamed, trying to frighten the air, the centurions were already calculating the distance for the throw. The gold necklaces on the Gaesatae's necks were not symbols of valor to the Romans. They were excellent aiming points. The stage was set. The actors took their places. On one side, furious, naked, screaming life. On the other, silent death clad in iron. Between them remained only a few dozen meters of dry grass, which, in a minute, was destined to turn red. The air rang with tension, ready to snap.
The psychological attack reached its peak, but did not break the formation.
And then, in this space ringing with screams, a short, dry command in Latin rang out. A command that would turn this theater of the absurd into a slaughterhouse. The time for words and demonstrations was over. The time for physics had arrived. A heavy pilum weighs several kilograms. Thrown by a skilled hand, it flies with terrifying force. And no faith in gods, no rage, no muscles can stop a sharpened piece of iron flying into an unprotected belly. Did you hear that sound? A whistle. Short, dry, like the sigh of 1,000 snakes at once. It is the sound with which the end of any barbarian army begins. The second the Gaesatae, intoxicated by their own audacity, filled their lungs with air for another battle cry, the sky over Telamon darkened. The Romans didn't answer a scream with a scream. They answered with a volley. Thousands of heavy pila soared up in a ballistic arc to crash down a moment later, with force that cannot be stopped by faith or muscle. Physics is the cruelest of sciences, and on that day, it was on the side of the legions. Imagine the kinetic energy of a 6-foot shaft weighted with lead and ending in a long iron tip. This isn't an arrow that can be blown away by the wind. It is a flying crowbar. When such a thing hits an unprotected human body, it doesn't just wound. It switches a person out of life. Instantly. The front ranks of the Gaesatae, those immortal giants who a minute ago were showing off their nudity, simply vanished. They were swept away like bowling pins. A beautiful gold neck ring doesn't stop steel. The lack of armor they were so proud of turned them into perfect targets. The Romans didn't even need to aim at vulnerable spots. The enemy's entire body was one continuous vulnerable spot. This wasn't a duel, not a fight of equals. It was an execution at point-blank range. The ground instantly became slippery, greedily soaking up the price of barbarian arrogance. But the real nightmare began for those who managed to get their shields up. The Roman pilum is a brilliant invention of a sadistic engineering mind. Its tip is made of soft iron for a reason. Punching through a wooden Gallic shield, it doesn't get stuck. It bends under its own weight. And so, imagine yourself in the Gallic warrior's place. You are alive. You covered yourself with a shield, but a heavy 6-foot stick is sticking out of it and dragging on the ground. It's impossible to pull out, and impossible to chop off in the chaos of battle. Your shield, your only friend and protector, instantly turns into a traitor. It becomes an unliftable anchor. It pulls your arm down, opening you up for a strike. And thousands of Gauls, growling with impotence, were forced to make a terrible choice. Drop the shield and remain absolutely defenseless before a wall of Roman swords, or try to fight with a kettlebell on their arm. Most dropped their shields. And that was exactly what the Romans were waiting for. The second act of this tragedy began with frightening silence. After the crash of the volley, the legions closed ranks and stepped forward. A wall of scutum shields slammed into the disorganized crowd of barbarians. The meat grinder began in the most technical, industrial sense of the word. The Gallic longsword is a fearsome weapon, but temperamental. To strike with it, you need a swing. You need space. A warrior must turn, raise his arm, bring the blade down. It is the weapon of a lone hero. But the Romans gave them no space. They pressed close to the enemy, shield to shield, face to face. In such tight quarters, a longsword is useless. You cannot swing without hitting your neighbor. The Gauls were trapped by their own tactics. They tried to chop, but their blades clattered impotently against the rims of Roman scuta, or got bogged down in the crowd. And the legionary had a gladius in his hand, a short, wide Spanish sword. It needs no swing. It needs only 4 inches of space. Thrust. A short jab from behind the shield into the stomach or groin. Twist of the wrist. Return. Thrust. Twist. Return. It is the work of a sewing machine, stitching a shroud for an entire army. The Roman doesn't need to see the enemy's face. He doesn't need to look him in the eye. He simply executes a mechanical movement practiced for thousands of hours on the drill field. Hide behind the scutum. Take the blow on the umbo. the iron boss in the center of the shield, and strike back into the opened gap. Look at this scene from above. You see two masses. One, motley, seething, chaotic. That is the Gauls.
They throw themselves at the Roman formation like waves against a breakwater and shatter into foam.
The other, monolithic, gray, rhythmically pulsing. That is the legion. It doesn't break. It works as a single organism. Rear ranks support the front, letting no one take a step back. Tired fighters retreat deep into the formation at the centurion's whistle, and fresh forces take their place. It is a conveyor belt. A Gaul who kills a Roman sees a new, fresh enemy in front of him a second later. A Roman who kills a Gaul sees the same endless crowd of the doomed in front of him. Psychological breakdown happened right before their eyes. The Gaesatae, those furious berserkers, suddenly realized their screams didn't scare these iron statues, that their nudity offered no protection, that their gods were silent. Rage gave way to bewilderment, and then animal terror.
They tried to gnaw through this wall of shields, grabbing the edges of Scuta with bare hands, trying to rip them away from the legionaries.
In response, they received only cold steel slicing through fingers and wrists. The myth of the northern giant's invincibility collapsed not in philosophical debates, but here, in mud and blood. It turned out that in open battle, discipline always beats rage. That formation is always stronger than a mob. That the technology of killing is more important than personal heroism. The Romans methodically ground down the elite of the Gallic host, turning the battlefield at Telamon into a slaughterhouse. The air grew thick with a metallic taste. Red mud squelched underfoot. The Gallic chieftains, Aneroestes and Concolitanus, watched their army melt away. They saw their best warriors falling, mown down by the invisible scythe of Roman tactics. The death sandwich was compressing. Romans pressed from two sides.
From the north, Regulus's avengers. From the south, Pappus's army. Space was becoming scarce. There was nowhere to stack the corpses. They walked on them, slipping and falling onto sword points. It was a dead end. A positional stalemate where the Gauls were running out of pieces. They still stood, they still fought with the desperation of cornered beasts, but the outcome was mathematically predetermined. The infantry had done its job. It tied the enemy in combat, deprived him of maneuver, bled and exhausted him. The Gallic formation, that living rectangle, began to lose shape. Fatigue is a terrible enemy. Arms holding heavy swords filled with lead, knees trembled. And precisely at that moment, when it seemed it couldn't get worse, the Roman commander decided to play his main card. The earth began to tremble. But not from the tramp of infantry. This sound was different. A deep, rolling rumble coming from the flanks. The Gauls, busy with the slaughter in the center, raised their heads too late.
The Roman cavalry, which had been waiting on the sidelines like vultures on a branch until this moment, sprang into motion. This wasn't just an attack. It was a control shot to the head of an already mortally wounded beast. The flanks of the Gallic army, the only thing still holding shape, suddenly came under the blow of thousands of hooves. Have you ever seen ice break on a river? First, a single, thin, barely noticeable crack appears. It snakes along, branches out, and suddenly, in an instant, the monolithic surface shatters into thousands of shards. That is exactly what happened to the Gallic army when the Roman cavalry struck. What happened next can no longer be called a battle. It was a collapse. Roman horsemen, keeping in the shadows until this moment, crashed into the barbarian flanks with the implacability of a blacksmith's hammer. Imagine the physics of this moment.
Thousands of horses, each weighing half a ton, accelerated to a gallop, slamming into a dense mass of infantry that is already exhausted, bled dry, and tied down in combat with legionaries at the front. This isn't fencing. This is pure kinetic energy grinding bones. The blow was of such force that the Gallic formation didn't just bend, it snapped. Those standing on the edges were swept away instantly. Horses knocked men off their feet, trampled them with hooves, while riders delivered spear thrusts from above, choosing victims with frightening ease. But more terrifying than the blow itself was its psychological effect. A flank attack is every infantryman's nightmare. It is the feeling that the wall behind your back has collapsed, and now death can come from any side. And then the domino effect kicked in. A military formation holds on an unspoken social contract. I hold a shield to cover your side, and you hold a shield to cover mine. We stand shoulder to shoulder, and as long as we are together, we are a force. But as soon as the first dozen warriors dropped their weapons and tried to run from the horsemen, that contract was torn up. The virus of panic spreads faster than the plague. 1 running man is a coward. 10 running men are cause for concern. 100 running men is a signal. All is lost, save yourselves. Warriors in the center, who didn't even see the Roman horsemen, felt the pressure on their backs disappear. They looked back and saw not comrades ready to support them, but the backs of fugitives and the bared teeth of Roman horses. Chaos engulfed the army. No one listened to the chieftain's commands anymore. Trumpets blew signals, but they drowned in the wail of horror that covered the valley of Telamon. The great Gallic army, which only that morning threatened Rome with destruction, was turning into an uncontrollable herd before everyone's eyes. Men crushed each other trying to break out of the ring, but there was nowhere to break out to. Here is the cruel irony of the geographical trap. Those very wagons with looted goods they guarded so closely now became their jailers. Bulky carts clogging the rear cut off escape routes. Warriors tripped over chests of Etruscan silver, fell under wheels, got tangled in ox harnesses. The gold they came for was now killing them, not letting them take even a step. The Romans acted with surgical precision. The cavalry kept the crowd from dispersing, driving splinter groups back into the center, into the cauldron. Legionaries tightened the ring, reducing the enemy's living space step by step. This no longer looked like a war of 2 armies. It resembled a driven hunt, where beaters skillfully direct the beast into the line of fire. Fear in the surrounded crowd reached the stage where a man ceases to be human. He becomes an animal, driven by a single instinct: to survive at any cost. The Gauls began fighting each other for a spot in the center of the circle, further away from Roman swords. They trampled their wounded, shoved friends aside. The tribal unity sung in legends crumbled into dust. In the face of inevitable death, it was every man for himself. Have you ever been in a panic-stricken crowd? When the air becomes hot and stale, when ribs crack from the pressure of other bodies. Multiply that by 40,000. In the center of the Gallic camp, men were dying not from Roman weapons, but from suffocation and crushing. Their own mass was crushing them. And the Roman cavalry continued its harvest. Riders circled this writhing mass like wolves around a flock of sheep, biting off chunks from the edges. They didn't see warriors before them. They saw prey. Fear paralyzed the Gauls. Arms that had recently gripped swords firmly now dropped. Legs turned to jelly. The will to resist flowed out of them along with sweat and blood. The myth of the barbarian's noble fury shattered against the cold calculation of Roman tactics. It turned out that fury is only good when you have room for a run-up. When you are squeezed in a vice, fury turns into hysteria.
Special attention should be paid to the fate of the Gallic cavalry. Those 20,000 horsemen and charioteers who were supposed to be the strike force were the first to succumb to panic. Realizing the battle was lost, they tried to break through. But where? Romans were everywhere. In a mad attempt to save themselves, they crashed into their own infantry ranks, adding chaos and death. Horses trampled their own masters. It was the agony of a huge organism beginning to devour itself. At that moment, the Battle of Telamon finally ceased to be a battle. It moved into a new phase. A phase for which military historians have many euphemisms. Mopping up, liquidation of resistance pockets, final solution. But let's call things by their names.
The army turned into a mob.
And a mob is the perfect material for an executioner's work. The sun dipped toward sunset, illuminating the scene with long shadows. Dust raised by thousands of feet and hooves hung in the air like a bloody fog. The Romans stopped for a second to catch their breath and reform ranks. They saw the enemy was broken, that resistance had become meaningless. But they didn't lower their swords. On the contrary, in the eyes of the legionaries lit that special, terrible glint that appears when a soldier realizes the danger has passed. Only heavy, dirty, but necessary work remains. No order to take prisoners was issued. And where would they put them, these tens of thousands of enraged men? Roman logic was simple and terrible. An enemy left alive today will return with a sword tomorrow. Therefore, when the ring finally closed tight and running became physically impossible, the legions began preparing for the final act of this drama. The trap snapped shut completely. The beast was caught, immobilized, and lay breathing heavily, awaiting the coup de grace. But the Romans knew no mercy. They knew only efficiency. And now that panic had rendered the Gauls helpless, it was time to turn victory into total extermination. And so comes the moment when war ends and work begins. Heavy, dirty, monotonous work that makes shoulders ache and rubs palms raw. If up to this moment the event still had some veneer of heroic epic, shining armor, roaring trumpets, beautiful cavalry maneuvers, now all that vanished. Only the naked, unsightly mechanics of extermination remained. The Roman infantry, methodical as a steam engine piston, began moving into the cauldron. Look at the legionaries coming from the north. These are the soldiers of the dead consul Gaius Atilius Regulus. In their eyes, you will find neither the thrill of battle nor fear. There burns the icy fire of blood vengeance. To them, every Gaul standing ahead isn't just an enemy of the state, he is a personal insulter, an accomplice in the murder of their father commander. And in the Roman mentality, a blood debt is paid with interest. Huge, monstrous interest. There was no order to take prisoners. Or perhaps it was given but lost in the noise of battle. Or maybe it was simply ignored. However, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. The Roman machine switched to zero-tolerance mode. Have you ever seen wheat being harvested? The reaper doesn't hate the ear of corn. He just does his job. Step forward, swing of the sickle, step forward. The Roman legion acted the same way. Only instead of sickles, they had short Spanish swords, and instead of ears of corn, living people. The Roman step tactic in encirclement conditions turned into a conveyor belt of death. The first rank strikes. The shield pushes the enemy's body back, a thrust into opened flesh. The Gaul falls. The Roman steps over him, stepping with a heavy caliga on the face or chest of the dying man, to finish him off and move on. This isn't a duel. There is no place for fencing here. It is an industrial process. Strike, step. Strike, step. Inside the surrounded camp, A hell was unfolding that is impossible to describe without shuddering. Gauls, squeezed into a dense mass, lost the ability to resist in an organized way. They had no room to swing their long swords. They were packed so tight that many couldn't even raise their arms. The Romans had only to stab this defenseless, lowing with horror mass like sacks of grain. It was slaughter without risk. Legionaries were protected by scuta, while their enemies were deprived of even the chance to strike back. The degree of Roman ruthlessness would shock a modern humanist, but for an ancient man, it was the norm. The enemy must be destroyed completely, so you don't have to fight him again in a year. This is the cynical accounting of survival. A dead Gaul won't burn your farm. A dead Gaul won't take your children into slavery. The air over the battlefield became heavy and moist. The smell of iron, that metallic taste of blood, was so strong it could be tasted on the tongue. The ground underfoot turned into a red swamp. Legionaries slipped, fell into mud mixed with bodies, got up, and continued their work. Fatigue. That became the victor's main sensation by evening. Killing a man is physically hard. Killing 10 men is exhausting. Killing 100 is back-breaking labor. Legionaries' hands cramped from endless stabbing blows, swords dulled against bone and bronze ornaments. Soldiers switched places. The tired went to the rear to catch their breath and wipe sweat pouring into their eyes, while fresh ones stepped into the first line to continue the harvest. And what of the Gauls? At some point, fear turned into apathy.
Realizing there would be no mercy, that surrender was impossible, many simply sat on the ground, covered their heads with their arms, and waited for the end. Others, in a last fit of madness, threw themselves at Roman shields with bare hands, trying to bite the enemy's throat, but immediately fell, pierced by a dozen blades. This was the destruction of a nation's gene pool in real time. In this cauldron, not just an army was dying. The elite of the Celtic tribes was dying. Chieftains, the best warriors, young aristocrats, all were turning into a nameless pile of meat. Rome excised the future of its northern neighbors with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing a gangrenous limb. A special cynicism was added to the situation by the fact that all this was happening against a backdrop of incredible wealth. The gold for which the Gauls came to Etruria now lay in the mud underfoot. Precious cups flattened by hooves, torn expensive fabrics, scattered coins, blood and gold mixed into a single substance. Legionaries stepped on treasures without looking at them. Right now, they were interested in a different currency: enemies' lives. The time to collect trophies would come later. Now was the time to kill. Amidst this nightmare, Roman officers with stone faces ensured the formation didn't break. Discipline must be maintained, even during a massacre. Soldiers cannot be allowed to get drunk on blood and turn into a gang of murderers. The legion must remain a legion until the last heartbeat of the last enemy. Hold the line! Don't break distance! Thrust! Don't chop! These commands sounded over the field of death, reminding everyone that it wasn't the elements at work here, but the state. By sunset, resistance had practically ceased. Only isolated pockets remained, where groups of the most desperate barbarians tried to sell their lives dearly. But it was agony. The bulk of the 40,000-strong army lay on the ground, and that ground could no longer absorb the moisture. The silence that began to descend on the valley of Telamon was scarier than the noise of battle. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a graveyard. Only the moans of the wounded, the hoarse breathing of tired victors, and rare thuds as legionaries finished off those still moving were audible. Romans walking past bodies indifferently stuck swords into those lying down, checking if the enemy was alive.
This was called control. No malice, just a quality check of work performed. The Roman Republic showed its true face that day. A face usually hidden behind marble statues and oratorical eloquence. It is the face of a ruthless predator, for whom humanism is an empty sound when border security is at stake. They didn't just defeat the enemy, they ground him into powder, demonstrating to the whole world, he who raises a hand against Rome will not simply die, he will vanish. The sun set, but the work wasn't finished. Ahead lay the grimmest part of any battle, the inventory of death. Corpses had to be counted, their own separated from the strangers, and finally that harvest of gold gathered, which now belonged to no one but the victors. But the main thing had already happened. The great Gallic threat that had terrified Italy for centuries ceased to exist. It was ground into flour between Roman millstones, and that flour was red. Silence. That is the first thing that hits the ears when a slaughter of such scale ends. Not absolute, of course. Groans of those unlucky enough not to die immediately are heard. The hoarse breathing of victors pulling helmets off sweaty heads is heard. The buzzing of flies, the first and most important looters of any war, is heard. But compared to the hell that raged here just an hour ago, this silence seems deafening. It presses on the eardrums heavier than the battle cry of 40,000 throats. Welcome to the bookkeeping of death. The battle is over. The inventory begins. Look at this field. It is no longer a valley. It is a layer cake of flesh, iron, and mud. Historians will name a figure: 40,000 dead. Think about it. 40,000. That is the population of an entire city, crossed off the list of the living in a single daylight day. If you laid these bodies in a row, the road of death would stretch for tens of kilometers. But here they lie in a heap, 3 or 4 layers deep. Roman legionaries wander across this gruesome carpet, trying not to slip on what was once the flower of the Gallic nation. Now that the adrenaline has subsided and the sun has hidden behind the horizon, the time comes for the most cynical part of war: harvest time. The Roman soldier isn't just a killing machine. He is also a pragmatic owner. He knows what lies on the ground now belongs to him. And the most valuable thing here isn't rusting swords or pierced shields. The most valuable thing gleams on the necks of the dead with a dull, alluring light. Gold torques. Those heavy neck rings that were symbols of status, pride, and connection to the gods for Celtic warriors. Now it is just currency. Scrap precious metal. Legionaries bend down, jerk ornaments off stiffened bodies, test the gold with their teeth, weigh it in their palms. No reverence for the fallen enemy. It is just a bonus payment. Picture this scene. A weary veteran, covered in a crust of foreign blood, sits on a pile of bodies and methodically, like a peasant sorting potatoes, sorts the loot. Bracelet in the bag. Torque on the belt. Gold brooch in the purse. This is the real price of war. All the fury, all the valor, all the chieftain's loud words ultimately convert into a pile of yellow metal in a dirty Roman infantryman's hand. The wagons, because of which the Gauls lost mobility and life, are now broken open. Romans shake Etruscan silver, fabrics, and utensils out of chests. What the barbarians looted over months of campaigning passes to new owners in a single evening. The cycle of things in the nature of war is complete. Fate's irony? The Gauls worked as porters, delivering Etruria's riches right into the hands of the Roman treasury, and paid for the delivery with their lives to boot. But there is one trophy they are looking for not for profit. They are looking for it on principle. Among the mountains of corpses, special detachments wander, turning over bodies, peering into faces distorted by the last grimace of terror. They are looking for their consul. Gaius Atilius Regulus, whose severed head became the catalyst for this meat grinder, must be found.
Roman bureaucracy demands the case be closed, and they find him. Or rather, what remains of him.
The consul's body lies where the hottest fighting raged. Around him are mountains of elite Gallic warrior corpses. He took a worthy retinue with him to Hades. Legionaries stand around silently. There is no grief in this. There is grim satisfaction. The balance is restored. Debit met credit. The life of one Roman consul, paid for by the lives of 40,000 barbarians, and the death of their king, Concolitanus. The exchange rate is monstrous, but Rome always sets its own market rules. The other Gallic king, Aneruestes, the one who led this armada, managed to break out of the ring with a handful of followers. But the Romans didn't even have to chase him. Realizing it was all over, that his army was destroyed and his people bled dry, he did the only thing left to him. He and his retinue cut each other's throats. Suicide as the last act of freedom. For Rome, it was just another line in the report. Enemy leader self-liquidated. Execution costs 0 sestertii. The air fills with the smoke of funeral pyres, but they only burn their own, Romans. Their losses are also heavy, but against the backdrop of the annihilated enemy, they seem like a statistical error. The barbarians will remain here. Their bodies will become fertilizer for Tuscan fields. In a year, there will be an excellent grape harvest here. Nature will process this slaughter faster than human memory. 10,000 prisoners, those they decided not to kill immediately, sit on the ground, bound under the point of spears. They look at the mountains of their brothers' bodies with empty eyes. They don't yet know that they envy the dead. Ahead awaits not Valhalla, but the slave market, quarries, or the circus arena. They have ceased to be people. Now they are speaking tools, instrumentum vocale, which will go toward restoring the Roman economy. Living assets that can be depreciated until fully worn out. Commander Lucius Aemilius Pappus rides around the battlefield. He isn't smiling. He is calculating. How many torques will go to the temple of Jupiter's treasury? How many slaves will the patricians get? What triumph awaits him in Rome? To him, war is a business project, and this project has been closed with incredible profit. This night after the battle is a terrible time. A time when heroism evaporates, leaving only the sickening smell of decay and greed. Romans, sitting by fires, clean fat and blood off swords, divide loot, play dice for trophy helmets. They don't feel like villains. They feel like sanitation workers who have cleared the forest of dangerous beasts. This whole scene is a giant allegory of the Roman approach to the world. Order through destruction. Peace through total dominance. The consul's head on a pike didn't scare Rome. It simply started a mechanism that ground an entire people into dust and gold. And looking at these mountains of bodies, at this sea of fire and blood, any observer could draw only one conclusion. Rome does not take revenge. Rome invests in its security. And dividends from this investment will be paid out in enemies' fear for centuries to come. Change the scenery. Remove the smell of rotting flesh and the buzzing of flies. Breathe deeply. Now the air smells of incense, expensive perfumes, roasted meat of sacrificial bulls, and dust raised by hundreds of thousands of sandals. We are transporting ourselves from the bloody mud of Etruria to the stone-paved streets of the eternal city. The roar of battle has been replaced by the roar of an ecstatic crowd, which, if you think about it, sounds no less terrifying. This is the Roman triumph. The highest point of any politician's career, that very drug for which consuls are ready to send legions to slaughter and die themselves.
Lucius Aemilius Pappus,
The man who organized the trap at Telamon, rides a chariot along the Via Sacra. His face is painted with red ochre, likening him to Jupiter. At this moment, he isn't a man. He is a living deity, descended to earth to accept worship. But look at what moves before his chariot. These aren't just trophies. It is a graphic demonstration of how Rome digests its enemies. Wagons that just recently creaked under the weight of goods looted in Etruria are now driving through Rome. But now they are Roman goods. Gold torques taken from the necks of 40,000 dead are piled in heaps, sparkling in the sun. These are no longer symbols of barbarian honor. They are an accounting report on profit. The crowd roars with delight, seeing how much gold will pour into the Republic's economy. Every plebeian knows today's victory is tomorrow's free bread and circuses. Following the gold come those unlucky enough to survive. The tallest, fiercest of the captured Gauls. They were shackled in chains, but left in their barbarian clothes to emphasize the contrast between savagery and civilization. They walk, heads down, under a hail of mockery and rotten vegetables. Just yesterday, they were the terror of Italy, the Gallic nightmare used to scare children. Today, they are circus animals being led to a cage. Romans look at them and heal from their age-old fear. The sight of a humiliated giant is the best therapy for a nation suffering from a vulnerability complex. This parade is not a celebration. It is a political ritual of cementing reality. When the triumphator's chariot turns toward the capital to offer sacrifice to Jupiter, the procession with the captive chieftains splits off and goes the other way, toward the Tullianum, a damp, dark underground prison. There, far from the crowd's eyes, the final act of the drama takes place. The garrote, a strangulation cord, puts a period at the end of the Gallic invasion story. No pathos, no speeches.
just the cold liquidation of leaders who dared to challenge the Republic.
But let's look away from the glitter of the triumph and look at the map. The true significance of the Battle of Telamon lies not in gold and not in the glory of one consul. It lies in what happened after. Telamon became a green light for Rome. Until this moment, the Republic was afraid to stick its nose beyond the Apennines, into the Po Valley where Celts ruled. Now, with the flower of the Gallic nation rotting in Tuscan soil, northern Italy suddenly emptied. Rome didn't just beat back an attack. It launched a counteroffensive that forever changed the region's demographics. Over the next 3 years, legions crossed the mountains and carried out a total cleansing in Cisalpine Gaul. The Boii and Insubres, having lost their best warriors at Telamon, could not resist. Romans founded colonies, Placentia and Cremona. These weren't just cities.
They were military bases.
Concrete nails driven into the coffin of Gallic independence. Lands where Celts had lived for centuries were sliced into plots and distributed to Roman veterans. It was colonization in the harshest sense of the word. And here we come to the main conclusion, to why the Battle of Telamon is possibly the most underrated event in ancient history. Look at the calendar. The battle took place in the year 225 BC, and just 7 years later, in 218, Rome's worst nightmare would descend from the snowy passes of the Alps. Hannibal Barca. Imagine for a second what would have happened if the Battle of Telamon hadn't occurred, or if the Gauls had won. Hannibal would have descended into Italy and found not broken, bled-dry tribes hating Rome, but trembling before it. He would have found a powerful, self-confident 50,000-strong army of Boii and Insubres, ready to immediately join his ranks.
With such support, Hannibal would have wiped Rome off the face of the earth in the first year of the war. The history of Europe would have taken a completely different path. We might be speaking a dialect of Punic right now. But history doesn't know the subjunctive mood. When Hannibal arrived, he found northern Italy in ruins. The Gauls, of course, supported him, but these were remnants of former greatness. They didn't have those resources, that demographic power which was destroyed at Telamon. The battle that began with the severed head of a Roman consul ironically saved Rome from total destruction 7 years later. Telamon was a vaccination, painful, bloody, with a high fever, but it developed an immunity in the Republic that allowed it to survive the deadly virus of the Carthaginian invasion. The price of an empire's security is always measured in mountains of corpses. The Romans understood this better than anyone else. They didn't believe in peace treaties. They believed in a cleared perimeter. By destroying 40,000 people in one day, they bought themselves a future. Cruel? Undoubtedly. But in the logic of the ancient world, the only correct way. The story of Gaius Atilius Regulus has come full circle. His rashness led to his death, but his death triggered a mobilization mechanism that turned the Republic into a machine of total war. His severed head didn't become a trophy decorating a barbarian hut. It became a symbol under which Rome stepped into a new era. An era where there is no place for noble savages, but only provinces that need to be pacified, and enemies that need to be counted, surrounded, and destroyed. So was Rome's pride worth 40,000 lives? Was it genocide or necessary self-defense in the face of an existential threat? Looking at the ruins of Carthage and the greatness of Rome, a historian will tell you, victors are not judged. They are simply feared. And the consul's head on a pike. It merely reminded Rome that peace is an intermission between wars, and this intermission must be used to sharpen swords. The final question remains for you. Imagine you are a senator in the year 225. You know a threat is brewing in the north. You have the opportunity to destroy an entire people preemptively to secure your children. Will you press the Tumultus button? Or will you try to negotiate with those who understand only the language of force? Rome made its choice. What choice would you have made?